Good morning, students. Welcome to Module 2 of Cell, the Fundamental Unit of Life. In this module, we are going to discuss about unicellular organisms, multicellular organisms, structural organization of the cell, which will cover plasma membrane, cell wall, nucleus, cytoplasm. We are also going to cover in this module is movement of substances in and out of the cell through processes like diffusion and osmosis. So let's begin with unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. As you can see in the picture above, there is a picture of prokaryotic unicellular organism. It's a bacteria, it's a similar bacteria, it's the same bacteria that you have drawn in the previous module. What you see below is a picture of multicellular organisms. So as we compare, as we go about studying unicellular and multicellular organisms, you can keep these pictures in mind. So unicellular organisms are the organisms that have a single cell in their body, and they do not have any membrane bound organelles. Since their body is made up of a single cell, they directly interact with the environment. The body of the organism, of the unicellular organism, is in direct contact with the environment. So any kind of exchange or transport of materials is happening through simple diffusion process, that is simple movement of materials in and out of the membrane or in and out of the cell from its higher concentration to its lower concentration. Also, since the body itself is a single cell, all the cellular processes, which includes nutrition, respiration, excretion, etc., are carried out by that very single cell only. Now, if this cell supposedly gets injured or it gets fatally injured, the organism will die because that cell itself is the body of the organism. Since they are very small, they can only be seen under the microscope. And about multicellular organism, they contain numerous cells in their body. The number can be any from a few to 100,000s to millions of cells. They contain membrane. These cells or multicellular organisms have cells in their body that contain membrane bound organelles like nucleus, mitochondria. And the cells in the body are actually differentiated in order to perform specialized functions. The outer cells of the body are specialized to the exposure with the environment. For example, we have the outer cells of the body have hair-like structures to actually deal with the environment. The exchange of materials or the transport takes place by several processes such as simple diffusion, active and passive transport. Now, in case of multicellular organism, most organisms are visible to the naked eye. And if this cell ever get injured, it does not affect much the organism, or we can say the organism will not die if only a single cell or a few cells die. So that's about unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. Moving on to structural organization of the cell. Now, every cell is composed of some common basic structure which will be seen in every cell. Now, these structures are plasma membrane, which is also called as cell membrane, cell wall, nucleus, and cytoplasm. Why are these important? Because all the activities inside the cell and their interaction with the environment are possible only due to these components. Let's study these in detail. What you see here is a microscopic view of the cells of onion peel. As you can see in the diagram, it is showing a nucleus very clearly, which is stained blue in this picture, and a dark, thick cell wall. Then there is a thin cell membrane or plasma membrane and very fluidy cytoplasm. Let's begin with plasma membrane. Now, plasma membrane is a living part of the cell. It is thin, it is delicate, it is elastic, it is selectively permeable. It is made up of lipids and proteins. Now, lipids are fats. As you can see in the diagram, the main constituent of plasma membrane is lipids and proteins. Where will you find this plasma membrane? You will find this plasma membrane in case of plant cell inside the cell wall. Cell wall is the outer membrane. You will find it inside the cell wall. In case of animal cell, it forms the outermost layer of the cell or the boundary of the cell. Now, what are the function it performs? Plasma membrane is selectively permeable. Now, selectively permeable means it only allows certain materials to move in or out of the cell, which means it prevents all the necessary material inside the cell, all the organelles inside the cell to stay inside the cell. It doesn't let them flow out, nor does it let any toxic material or any foreign bodies that should not enter the cell to move into the cell. Then it gives shape to the cell because it's the boundary of animal cell. It actually gives shape to the cell. It also helps in the processes, that is diffusion and osmosis. It also segregates. The segregates means separates the cell contents from the surroundings. Now moving on to cell wall. Cell wall is comparatively thicker. It is non-living, it is thick, it is rigid, it is freely permeable, and it is made up of cellulose. Now, where can you find a cell wall? A cell wall is usually found in all eukaryotic plant cells and prokaryotic cells, that is bacteria, plants, algae, etc. In case of plant cells, you will find outside of plasma membrane, as you can see in the picture, you can see a thick layer which is the cell wall outside the cell. In case of animal cell, the cell wall is not present, it is absent. What is the function of the cell wall? It obviously determines the shape of the cell. Which cell? Plant cell. It protects the plasma membrane because plasma membrane is present inside it. It also prevents drying up of cells. It acts as a protective coat, doesn't let the cell to dry that easily or desiccate. It also helps in various substances. It also helps the various substances to move in and out of the cell. It is freely permeable. It prevents the cell from bursting when sometimes the cell gets surrounded by very dilute medium such as water for too long. You have seen plant cells or vegetables, you have seen when put in water they tend to swell and eventually they may burst. So the cell wall prevents this from happening to a good extent. Next component up is nucleus. Now nucleus we know is the brain of the cell. We call it as brain of the cell. It is small, it is dense, it is spherical, and it is bound by a porous nuclear membrane or nuclear envelope, we can say. It contains a fluid-like cytoplasmic material called as nucleoplasms. This nucleoplasm consists of chromosome. As you can see in the picture, this orangish pinkish part inside the cell is the nucleus. The bright outline of it is the nuclear envelope, and the another pinkish peachish material inside is the nucleoplasm, and within which you can see the strands of chromosomes. Now what are chromosomes? We need that chromosomes contain genes and they are the carriers of genetic information. What are they made up of? DNA strands. They are made up of DNA strands. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, which is the genetic material present inside the cell. Now, where will you find this nucleus? In animal cell, the nucleus is found in the center of the cell. You can see the picture and you can identify whether it's an animal cell or a plant cell. In case of a plant cell, the nucleus is more closer to the boundary of the cell, or you can say the periphery of the cell. Now, what is the function that does a nucleus serve? It is responsible for storing DNA, which is the cell's hereditary material. It coordinates many important cellular activities such as protein synthesis, cell division, growth, and many other important activities. It also acts as the storehouse of genes. So we can say that without nucleus, neither cell can survive nor can it show any specialized activities. This actually is the brain of the cell. Moving on to another important component, that is cytoplasm. Now, cytoplasm is equally essential. It is a jelly-like, viscous, colorless, semi-fluid-like substance in which various cell organelles, insoluble waste, storage products are in colloidal form. Cytoplasm is very much like air to us. Now, location, where will you find this cytoplasm in a cell? It will be found between the plasma membrane and the nuclear membrane. It will be found between the envelope that surrounds the nucleus and the plasma membrane. So this fluidy material is present there. You can see in the picture very translucent material enclosed by plasma membrane, and you can see very clearly that the organelles are floating inside it. Now, what function does it serve? It acts as a site of certain metabolic pathways. You need to know that respiration, anaerobic respiration to be very precise, happens directly in the cytoplasm of the cell, while some part of aerobic respiration, which you have already studied about, also happens in the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm also acts as a store of vital molecules such as enzymes used for the cellular processes. It also helps to fill out the cell. You can see that the shape of the cell is primarily because of the cytoplasm present inside, filled inside the plasma membrane. It also keeps the organelles in their place and it protects them from damage. So that's all about structural organization of the cell. Moving on. Movement of substances in and out of the cell. Now, substances move in and out of the cell by either of the two processes. Diffusion, which will be down the concentration gradient, which means from higher concentration to lower concentration. And osmosis, which will happen across a semi-permeable membrane. As you can see in the diagram, it's clearly showing the same. Let's discuss these in detail. Now, diffusion is movement of molecules from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, but it does not requires a semi-permeable membrane. It happens in any medium, solid, liquid, gases, any medium. In case of diffusion, what is actually moving from its higher concentration to its lower concentration can be a solid, can be a liquid, can be a gas. Now, diffusion is a fast process. If once started, you cannot stop it, neither can you reverse it. The flow of the particles in case of diffusion happens in all directions. You have seen when you spray a perfume or a room freshener, you cannot control in which direction the smell will travel, the particles of the fragrance will travel. At the end of the diffusion process, the concentration of the solvent will not be equalized. In comparison to diffusion, osmosis is the movement of liquid, to be very precise, solvent, especially water, from the higher concentration, from actually its higher concentration to its lower concentration through the semi-permeable membrane. Now, in this case, presence of semi-permeable membrane is a must. It happens only in liquid medium because what is moving is actually only solvent. The movement is basically of the solvent. Osmosis is a slow process. Once started, it can be stopped. It can also be reversed. The flow of particles in this case happens in only one direction. From its higher concentration to its lower concentration, the solvent is moving in one direction only. And at the end of the diffusion process, the concentration of the diffusing particle, which is the solvent particle, will be equal on both sides of the semi-permeable membrane. Now, moving on to why diffusion is important. Why do we need it? All living cells rely on diffusion to live, basically. They use it for, number one, getting raw materials through respiration or for respiration, dissolved substances or gases, as you can see in the picture. It is also required for removing waste products from respiration, or you can say through the process of respiration. In case of plants, carbon dioxide diffuses from air through tiny pores in the plant leaves called stomata. We already know that. And oxygen that is produced in the process of photosynthesis also diffuses from the plants through the stomata into the atmosphere. So diffusion is very important for the plants as well as for the animals. Now, why is osmosis important? In plants, osmosis is exhibited in water absorption as water absorption by the plant roots. Osmosis, the roots of the plant from the ground absorb water which is the solvent through a semi-permeable membrane which is their membrane, cell membrane. And osmosis is important for plant stability. You can say wilted plants are result of a lack of plants in the plant vacuoles. You have seen that how you water a plant and it becomes fresh again because of the osmosis. The water is absorbed through the process of osmosis by the plant. With this, we come to the end of module 2. Happy learning.